There's the France, you know, with its must-see monuments, breathtaking landscapes and beautiful villages. But behind these places sometimes lies a more secret, surprising and disturbing France. What if we were to take a look behind the scenes, at the hidden face of our country? Who could imagine that some of our most beautiful landscapes and historic monuments have been struck by terrible curses? And yet, all over France, the devil and his strange creatures have terror and given rise to many legends. Dragons, werewolves, witches. Werewolves, witches, ghosts, and even vampires. They could attack innocent people or drive an entire town mad. In the Périgord region, boat builders navigating the Dordogne feared crossing the path of a dangerous beast, guilty of causing many an accident.
These shipwrecks were attributed to a monster known as the couleuvre, meaning snake in Occitan.
Fearsome creatures obeying the devil also populate our forests. In Amanches, Jura, a werewolf terrorized the population. The population for several months in the 16th century.
He was in the forest. The devil is said to have said, "I'm giving you a magic potion, a nail with which you'll be able to transform yourself."
Behind all these evil creatures, one and the same popular fear, Satan. In Burgundy, a village even bears his name, Malin. In the 13th century, a witch is said to have cast a spell there, and strangely enough, Malin has been the scene of repeated tragedies ever since. The alleys of the Montparnasse cemetery in Paris have also experienced horror. A mysterious being roamed the grounds at night, exhuming women's bodies. For a long time it was said to be a vampire.
It's this lack of respect for the boundary between the living and the dead that makes us talk about vampires.
And what about the mysterious epidemic that caused panic in Strasbourg in the 16th century? Several hundred inhabitants began, day and night to the point of exhaustion. Was this another diabolical manifestation?
The most rational explanation at the time was indeed a curse.
Everywhere in France, from the shores of the Dordogne to the Vosges Mountains, unsuspected places hide dark secrets. We're going to discover this troubled and little-known France, which plunges us into a world of horrors, frights, and mysteries, some of them unexplained. The France of cursed legends and strange creatures. With its monuments, Paris is an open-air history book, but some of them hide terrifying stories. Such is the case of the Montparnasse cemetery.
Like all cemeteries, the Montparnasse cemetery harbors many mysteries, many secrets.
In the 19th century, this peaceful haven became a favorite playground for a macabre character.
In the mornings at the Montparnasse cemetery, exhumed and very badly mutilated bodies are repeatedly found.
It's appalling. It's absolute horror.
Who could have committed such atrocities? A man, a beast, a demon?
This person seemed to be endowed with extraordinary abilities that ordinary mortals don't have.
For several months, one gruesome discovery followed another. Some of the exhumed bodies bore bite marks. For the press, there is only one being capable of such acts.
They call him the vampire of Montparnasse. That's the vampire.
We're dealing with a character who clearly doesn't have the same fears as ordinary mortals. A mysterious being with no face, no name.
The investigators will do their utmost to reveal the man terrorizing all of Paris.
It is said that he is immortal, that there is something demonic about him.
The vampire deeply shocks the society of his time because he doesn't respect the boundary between life and death.
Who hides behind this monstrous character? What are his motivations? Let's discover the secret and sinister history of this Parisian necropolis. A true story that thrilled the whole of France in the 19th century. To the south of the capital, the Montparnasse cemetery. 19 hectares of greenery and marble. The second largest necropolis after Père Lachaise Cemetery.
This is one of the most beautiful green spaces in Paris, with S1200 trees.
When it welcomed its first guests on July 25, 1823, the cemetery was outside the capital, just a few meters from the Barrière d'Oak 3.
The cemeteries within the city walls could no longer accommodate them, and the population had to be moved out of Paris for health reasons.
By day, the cemetery is a place dedicated to serenity and meditation, but by night, it attracts an outlaw population.
It's a place on the banks of the city. It's a place where, at night, people who aren't good bourgeois meet. It's a place where people without wealth gather in the evening.
Barely 20 years after its opening, the cemetery was to experience the most appalling episode in its history. It all began on the morning of August 2, 1848.
A frightful surprise awaited the janitors, or rather one janitor. He sees a shape in the alley. He approaches. What he sees is beyond comprehension. It's a body, but it's a body that has been mutilated. The body has been exhumed, ripped from the earth and given over to, but with a rare violence worse than rage. A beast had attacked this body, the body of a woman.
The press seized on the case as a news item, but more than that, in the end, something close to the supernatural. Because it happened at night, because it happened in a cemetery, and because it happened just outside Paris.
Questions abound about this senseless act.
We don't really understand who could have done it or why, except that maybe it was the work of a madman, and we tell ourselves that it won't happen again.
However, 3 months later, in November 1848, the Parisian necropolis was once again hit by this mysterious nocturnal visitor. And this time, it wasn't one body, but several that a janitor found exhumed in the morning.
The bodies are described as even more mutilated than in the first case. Lacerated, the entrails pulled out.
I can just imagine the look on the guard's face in the morning. It's appalling. It's absolute horror.
A whole intriguing, almost fantastic story unfolds.
This recurrence panics Parisians. Who dares to attack their death? A monstrous creature, a supernatural being.
We're on the borderline between the civilized and the animal, and the savage. And that's very worrying. We're dealing with a character who obviously doesn't have the same fears as ordinary mortals. He's not afraid of being in the territory of the dead, of disturbing them. He seems to walk in a universe, populated by everything one could imagine at night in cemeteries, and not at all afraid of either the dead or the living.
For the press, there's only one word to describe this mysterious being who prowls the night. They call him the Vampire of Montparnasse. It's the vampire. The lack of respect for the boundary between the living and the dead leads to talk and dangerous fantasies about vampires. This person who has no face, no presence after all. The cemetery guards investigate to unmask the culprit. In particular, they are trying to understand how he manages to exhume bodies.
In the 19th century, you have chapels built for very well-to-do families, but you also have the poorest, either buried in independent graves, but in the ground, in a shroud, or else in a false commune.
These graves are easily accessible. There are no monuments to prevent the earth from being dug up.
He looked for a fresh grave so that the earth was still loose. Sometimes he'd come across a man and lash out at him with his saber. Eventually, if he was quiet, he'd look for another grave. He'd look for a woman. As a predator, he prefers women and young girls.
And when his search is successful, the vampire indulges in unspeakable acts.
Once he's managed to dig her up, he commits the worst acts on her. He cuts her to pieces, tears out her intestines, and bites her.
The vampire of Montparnasse terrifies the population. He becomes the source of every fantasy.
At the time, some thought that the demon had crept into him and was taking over his body.
Demon or not, the Guardians of Montparnasse are obsessed with the idea of his return to wreak havoc.
We await the return of this vampire with guards in place, with guards who have dogs that are armed.
After several weeks of searching, we think we finally found the place where he enters the cemetery unseen.
Here we are at one of the historic boundaries of the Montparnasse Cemetery, Rue Foidevaux, which is just on the other side of this wall, which at the time was a palisade. And it was here, just a few meters away, that the Montparnasse vampire crossed the palisade with extraordinary agility. He was worthy of a Batman.
Thanks to this discovery, the hunt can finally begin.
The guards, who were ex-military, had set a trap. The trap was a firecracker hidden in a grave. The trigger was connected to the top of the palisade by a small rope.
A fatal trap was about to close on the dark visitor.
Capturing him was out of the question. The order had been given, and the guards were fully prepared to carry it out, was given to kill him.
Then, one night in March 1849, the petroleum machine went off.
He set off the machine but managed to escape.
Able to escape the most ingenious and deadly of traps, the elusive vampire is a source of irrational hypotheses.
They say he's immortal, that there's something strange about him, something demonic. We now suspect he might return and do it again.
Come back and do it again, even if we don't know why.
The disturbing character seems to take a real pleasure in defying the forbidden. On the night of March 15, 1849, the trap is sprung a second time. Had the infernal trap finally worked?
He was hit squarely on the hip, buttock, and thigh. He has nearly 30 impacts.
Yet, despite his injury, the mysterious intruder disappeared once again. Could he really be immortal?
This time his wounds were quite severe, but he left his mark.
On the floor, traces of blood and a piece of red clothing. Another mystery. The guards' investigation stalled. But a few days later, during the burial of two soldiers in the Montparnasse cemetery, a conversation between two soldiers suddenly aroused the guards.
That's when the cat was out of the bag, as the soldiers said. One of ours is in hospital and has been wounded. Hospitalized, and he was injured in a rather peculiar way 2 days ago.
The guards who hear this will make the connection with the piece of cloth they found in the cemetery on the evening of the last incursion.
This fabric is familiar to the guards. It's the fabric worn by the soldiers on their jackets. And the man the soldiers are talking about is a young sergeant who turned up at the Val-de-Grâce military hospital on the night the firecracker went off. He said he had been injured in a fight near a toll gate, but his alibi failed to convince the doctor who attended him.
Immediately there were rumblings in the hospital that he was an affabulator, that the story of the barriers and the fight were a fabrication. An investigation was launched. It goes all the way up to the Minister of War, saying this person, after all, may be the vampire. The whole thing falls into place. Very quickly, as the news broke a few days later, the vampire's name will finally be officially known.
The identity of the vampire sets the press abuzz. His name is François Bertrand. He's a sergeant in a garrison based at in the Luxembourg Gardens, a stone's throw from the Montparnasse cemetery. When people see his face, they are stunned.
He's 25 years old. He's had a good education. He was sent to the priest's seminary. He's a very well-educated, well-presented young man. He's a young man with beautiful eyes, a handsome face, very discreet.
He's a romantic candidate. He's not very tall. He's blonde. He's got a fine face. He's the well-turned, well-made guy. It's hard to imagine this boy turning into a monster at night.
We're in a completely unexpected situation here, and it's going to fascinate us all the more.
At his trial, the crowd gathers, curious, vindictive, and terrified. We learn that the angel-faced monster, his morbid tendencies for years. There was nothing in his demeanor to give cause for suspicion.
He had mistresses and bragged about them. He used to say, I have attics, they're satisfied, from garrison to garrison. He broke hearts, but he didn't dare say that dead was better than alive.
As the days went by, the thick mystery surrounding the accused would dissipate somewhat, thanks in particular to the testimony of the doctor, who obtained Sergeant Bertrand's confession.
Bertrand at the trial clearly says in court, go on, tell the doctor everything, because he can't say it all himself.
What the sergeant can't admit to are the intimate motivations that drove him to the corpses of women.
Some doctors say that they mutilated the bodies, particularly the genitals, to hide the fact that he had raped them.
The doctor concluded that it was a real pathology. He was a sick man.
These were totally new facts, unprecedented and unthinkable for the population at the time.
Sergeant Bertrand is the first known case of what we today call a necrophiliac. For this unusual criminal, an exemplary sentence, but the verdict was to be rather disconcerting.
At the time, the maximum sentence was 1 year, because what he had committed was not a crime, but a misdemeanor. The law had not foreseen that there could be individuals like Bertrand.
After serving his sentence, he was sent to Algeria for hard labor. On his release, he settled in Le Havre, where he married. They thought they'd got rid of his urges, but they may have resurfaced. 20 years after the case of the vampire of Montparnasse, a strange discovery shook the inhabitants of Le Havre.
The press reported that 2 bodies had been ripped from the earth, suffering the same fate as the victims of the Montparnasse predator.
Coincidence or recurrence? The mystery of France's most notorious vampire remains unsolved. Saverne, a small Alsatian town bordered by the Vosges Mountains. Entering the forest, you come upon an unusual place of worship, a chapel set in the heart of a grotto.
It's a soothing place. Every year, thousands of people pass through here.
It's understandable that this place has attracted pilgrims and attracted people, a somewhat mysterious place.
Dedicated to the cult of a holy healer, Saint Guy, this grotto played a decisive role in the 16th century, when an astonishing epidemic befell the town's population. The population of nearby Strasbourg.
Hundreds of people danced hysterically from morning to night, every day for weeks on end.
The victims of this curse seemed to have no control over their movements.
They were deranged, making grand gestures.
It was clearly something beyond comprehension and beyond normal behavior.
In Strasbourg, the phenomenon is taking on worrying proportions.
The city is completely overwhelmed.
But why are these women turning into hysterical dancers?
The most rational explanation at the time was that there was indeed a curse.
People would do anything to stop the male. That's when we came up with the idea of a mysterious pilgrimage to the Saverne grotto. It was a kind of exorcism ritual. So, what strange secrets does this grotto hold? Why were the sick convinced they'd find a solution to their curse here? An incredible true story, one of the strangest to come out of Alsace. The Zorn Valley and the town of Saverne in Alsace are dominated by a lush forest. On a stroll among the towering fir trees, the visitor can discover a surprising creation of nature.
We're standing on the heights of Saverne, in front of this imposing rock mass, which must be around 20 meters high. It's a place that exudes energy.
You only have to get close to it to realize that this thick rock hides an unexpected place of worship.
We arrive at the grotto, which was converted into a chapel in the Middle Ages. It's a soothing place. Every year, thousands of people pass through.
Housed in a dark grotto since the 14th century, it attracts more than just the curious. Thousands of sick and infirm have passed through here in search of a cure, or even a miracle. Miracle, for the chapel is dedicated to a holy healer, Saint Guy, also known here as Saint Vite.
People who came here felt these telluric waves. It's a special place.
Women in need of a child would come and lay small toad-shaped objects on the chapel of Saint Vite. This symbolized the womb, and it was believed that Saint Guy could intercede to heal them.
People also came here in search of a little hope, at a time when worry about tomorrow haunted people's minds.
People lived in fear of tomorrow. There were epidemics and diseases.
There were peasant revolts in those years. This is the third year of difficult harvests, so we're still in a period of tension.
It was against this backdrop that, in the 16th century, this atypical chapel saw hundreds of people affected by an extraordinary epidemic. It all began some 40 kilometers from Saverne, in the streets of Strasbourg on July 14, 1518. A woman began to gesticulate in a strange way.
Her movements resembled a kind of dance, but not a codified dance, but a frenetic dance.
Her dance looked like something out of a trance. It looks like voodoo. You might think of something like that.
Strangely enough, without anyone being able to explain it, this woman dances day and night, and very quickly, other cases appear.
This first woman starts dancing, and then she's imitated. She's imitated quite rapidly and quite massively.
Everyone went into a trance. A whole neighborhood went into a trance.
Every day, the number of hysterical dancers increases. The main victims are the women, but nothing, for the moment. The rational causes of this collective madness. A more mysterious culprit was quickly identified.
At the time, people thought it was the evil one, the devil acting underhand.
Indeed, it was thought to be a supernatural manifestation.
Superstition, perhaps. In any case, it was this explanation that won over the population.
In the Middle Ages, illness was seen as a kind of sign from God, either a punishment or a trial.
Saints and demons were everyday characters who constantly intervened in people's movements, in events, in everything that happened to them. This or that saint can reproach the city for its behavior, can reproach its elites for immoral behavior. This was the rational explanation for the curse at the time.
For the Strasbourg authorities, the situation gave cause for concern. To restore public order, a surprising solution was recommended. People want to dance. Then we'll encourage them. A stage and musicians were set up on the main square where the horse market was held.
Hundreds of people danced hysterically from morning to night every day for weeks. There were crowds.
We pointed them out. There were women exhibiting their breasts, plus the rest. It was really crazy.
After a few hours, something strange happened.
The more people are encouraged to dance, the more they are drawn in and tend to want to do the same thing.
It was an uncontrollable thing.
We have at least 400 to 500 people dancing all the time. 400 people is a lot.
With their feet bleeding, as if possessed by a supernatural force, the dancers have no limits. Nothing seemed to be able to stop them.
These dances were exhausting and we supported them. I think the crowd was clapping. There was a whole atmosphere, and they danced for hours.
After a few days, the authorities were forced to make a terrible observation. Not only were the musicians not offering a solution, they were making the situation terribly worse.
There was a tendency to dance non-stop day and night.
This has appalling consequences, since people who were exhausted and would normally have gone to bed to rest are now dancing themselves to death. It's estimated that 100 people have died in all.
How to stop this macabre dance? How to defeat this terrible curse? The authorities are at a loss. It's becoming urgent to restore calm to Strasbourg.
The authorities decided that the disorder had to stop, and that the people could not be left in this state any longer. It was therefore decided to evacuate them.
Evacuate them so they don't contaminate the rest. to export the disorder in any case elsewhere.
forcing the possessed into exile. But where? The Grotte Saint-Vite in Saverne comes to mind, a renowned place where the cult of the Holy Healer has been popular for over 2 centuries.
The modern treatments proposed by the town council were turning into a disaster, and we decided to go back to the tried and tested traditional method of going on pilgrimage, sending all the sick on pilgrimage to the Grotte Saint-Vite in Saverne.
To try to calm them down and find a solution to their problems.
A vast evacuation plan is put in place. No expense was spared. The dancers were placed on horse-drawn carts and an extraordinary convoy, on their way to the last chance pilgrimage.
When they arrived in Saverne, the locals were completely stunned. What kind of convoy is this?
After a 3-day journey, the exhausted dancers were led to the grotto, where a very special ritual awaited them.
Red slippers were put on them, and they were spun around the hotel 3 times, sprinkled with holy water. The priest would say prayers to cure them of their ailment.
A strange ceremonial where, in the darkness of the cave, divine forces confront the forces of evil. In other words, an exorcism, because it's all about ridding the dancers of their inner demon. A last chance solution, where medicine, still in its infancy, has failed.
Herbs and other remedies were tried. In any case, in those days, we always referred to the saints.
It was obviously religious care that was practiced, prayers, offerings, ambulations around the church. A cure was expected, and this healing could only have a miraculous aspect.
A ritual skillfully orchestrated by an all-powerful church in 16th century Alsace.
We're in a context where the Christian religion encompasses the totality of phenomena, i.e., everything can be explained in terms of the Christian faith.
Thus, the idea that the cure of this disease could also be linked to the intervention of an intercessor, a specialized saint or deity, was entirely plausible.
Likely, but also relatively effective.
This remedy cured a great many of them.
But the mystery wasn't completely over.
There was still one part that was incurable.
No one will ever know why most of these dancers were cured in this mysterious place. Had they really been possessed? Had a miracle occurred here? Unless the secret of their healing came from an invisible power produced by the rock. 600 years on, the Grotte de Saint-Vite may not yet have revealed all its mysteries. In the depths of caves or in the heart of forests, behind castle walls or in a small village, curses strike everywhere. In 1572, in the Jura region, the people of Amange were convinced that a diabolical creature, half man, half wolf, was attacking their children. In Burgundy, the name of a village carries the curse Malin. Over the past 4 centuries, many tragedies have taken place here. Fatal rail disasters, mass suicides, unexplained behavior. Could it be due to the mysterious grotto known here as the Hellhole? We're going to discover the legends and strange creatures that lurk in the heart of our most beautiful regions. In the Jura, near the village of Amange, the Serre forest exudes a certain serenity. Yet in the 16th century, this dreamy setting descended into tragedy.
In 1572, there was in the Amange area. 3 children were discovered in the woods who had been killed.
All the bodies were found mutilated. It is said that part of their bodies had been eaten.
Who could have attacked children with such barbarity? A ferocious animal, a bloodthirsty killer, a demonic being.
There's going to be an amalgam between these children who've been killed and the possibility that it's someone linked to the devil who's killed them.
People are terrified, especially as some children have told of narrow escapes from monstrous creatures.
They say they were attacked by a wolf with human hands or a human face. These children really think they've been attacked by a wolf man.
We imagine, because at the time it was a strong belief, the existence of a werewolf, i.e. a person who is capable for the duration of the night of being attacked by a wolfman, transform into a werewolf and become a ferocious beast. And become a ferocious, foul beast with a thirst for blood and fresh flesh.
A werewolf who eats children? How could this happen?
It's an exceptional case. It's truly the diabolical mystery incarnate.
5 centuries later, in Amange, the diabolical creature is still sending shivers down people's spines, as you will see. The Serre Forest, a natural heritage of over 40 hectares.
Here, we're almost at the summit of the Serre. What dominates here is this vast, slightly undulating forest.
The forest, a world steeped in mystery. Since the dawn of time, it has been associated with the worst creatures.
It's a magical place that both fascinates and frightens. It's the home of demons. It's the home of the devil and his minions. It's where dragons live. It's where the fairies live. It's a place full of magic, full of bewitchment, full of wonder.
To avoid unpleasant encounters, everyone avoids entering this dreaded place. A fear that was reinforced one day, 1572, when the Serre Forest became the scene of a terrible tragedy.
Children have disappeared.
3 teenagers aged 8 to 14 haven't returned to the village for several days. In Amange, panic and worry are the order of the day.
Questions are inevitably being asked, all the more so as there's the forest nearby, with all its strange things. Strange and frightening things, and that's why we're so worried.
After an interminable wait, the unthinkable happens.
The village has been plunged into horror because the bodies have been found but mutilated.
The villagers discover an abominable crime scene that boggles the mind.
They're being eaten. These children who are found are really damaged. In other words, they've been eaten. It's a vision of horror.
A menacing creature is on the prowl in the immensity of the Serre Forest, thirsting for fresh flesh. The population was shocked and searched for an explanation. Who could attack children? Why attack their bodies with such barbarity?
It could be the fault of a wolf, but at the crime scene, there's something extremely interesting for the investigators. The children were stripped naked. A wolf wouldn't undress a child.
The problem is, a man wouldn't have devoured the bodies of children.
That's going to make the lieutenants think. It's going to make the public think. And we're not going to think that this is the crime of a human being. So horrible. Only someone diabolical could have done such a thing to children who represent innocence.
The forces of good and evil obsessed people in the 16th century. Worst-case scenarios were created. Is this the work of a demon? Or perhaps a curse has befallen the village?
The reaction is, what have we done wrong to deserve this? What's our sin?
But what most frightens the villagers is the testimony of 2 children, 2 true survivors. They say they escaped the clutches of a fantastic beast.
They say they were attacked by a wolf with human hands or a human face. These children really think they've been attacked by a wolf man.
A half-man, half-wolf creature, in other words, a werewolf. A popular belief deeply rooted in the mentality of the time.
In antiquity, the werewolf was someone who drew strength from the wolf and returned to his tribe after 9 years with the wisdom of the wolf. The wisdom of the wolf, because the wolf is an extremely wise animal. He's fierce, but he's wise. In the 14th century, the werewolf underwent a complete transformation. There are several legends about a man who has been bewitched, goes mad, goes into the forest and starts eating little children. Little by little, the story turns into a sorcerer's tale. We're going to have to link this werewolf story to something real, to the devil, who took power from the 15th century onwards.
Witchcraft and the devil were words that made people's blood run cold. In the 16th century, the witch hunt was in full swing. Under the aegis of the church, trials multiplied. a way of terrifying the masses into submission. The macabre discoveries in the Serre forest only reinforced the general fear.
Obviously, there's going to be an uproar in the village. People want answers, and above all, to put an end to these horrible acts.
We want to find the culprit, but the investigation is botched.
Everyone in the village knew everyone else. You might even say they were almost all the same family. It seemed unthinkable that any of us could have done this, so we had to look elsewhere. A particular beast of Gévaudan style. We'd never heard of it. There was only one person we could think of, Gilles Garnier.
But who is this Gilles Garnier to whom all eyes are turning? For several weeks now, he's been at the center of everyone's conversations because he's not from the region.
Gilles Garnier hails from Lyon. He's a Lyonnais who decided to leave his region, perhaps as a result of some perhaps mysterious affairs, perhaps problematic for him.
This stranger who has come with his family is intriguing. All the more so, as he doesn't settle in the village of Amange, but in an abandoned 14th century hermitage, the Hermitage Saint-Bonneau.
The hermitage was empty, so he decided to move in with his wife and children. A new life begins for him in the middle of the forest.
We entered the building, which consists of two main rooms. About 10 meters long, 3-4 meters wide. Below there are two square rooms, whose function we don't necessarily know either. We found a lot of burnt bricks. We can imagine that there was a hearth, an oven. We also found a lot of tableware.
This spacious, comfortable shelter was a godsend for the head of the family. But in Amange, since his arrival, questions have been raised.
Who is this guy? What's he up to? Why did he leave his native region, and why has he come to live here?
Someone on the bangs of society.
A stranger who arrives shortly after the appalling tragedy. Conclusions are quickly drawn.
When you don't have an answer, you find a scapegoat?
Undoubtedly, the population saw in this stranger an ideal culprit who could immediately answer the question. It's the foreigner who killed our children.
It's easier and it's reassuring. It's a little comforting. We're in pain. It's his fault. That person or that group of people, that's it. It evacuates.
Gilles Garnier is a man by day and a werewolf by night. Whatever the lack of evidence, the public have found their culprit and want him dead. The authorities alleviated the villagers' hatred by taking an exceptional decision.
The Parliament of Dole is going to authorize the peasants to arm themselves, which is forbidden. Normally, peasants are not allowed to arm themselves.
The villagers invade the Serre forest with dogged determination.
They go in with a vengeance, a vengeance, a vengeance, a vengeance, a vengeance, and a vengeance.
In the heart of the mysterious forest, no one really knows how this improbable scare will end.
Since we believe in werewolves, we think we're going to run into one.
When we arrive at the hermitage, Saint-Bonneau, there's no werewolf, just a man, Gilles Garnier, powerless, overwhelmed by rumor and fear.
Gilles Garnier is about to be arrested. He is taken to Dole prison and tortured.
Torture, a necessary and terribly effective sentence to force a confession from the man the crowd considered a sorcerer.
He says yes, that he was in the forest, that he was sad, that he was starving, that he wondered how he was going to feed his children, and that the devil had said to him, I'll give you a magic potion, a nail with which you can transform yourself. And indeed, he rubbed himself with this magic grease and became a wolf, and he goes running and supposedly kills children. Children and bring food back to his family.
Does Gilles Garnier confess under torture to put an end to the accusations against him? Is he guilty of the murders perpetrated in the Serre forest? Or is he simply a scapegoat for popular vindictiveness? he takes his secret to the stake, where his fate is sealed. But after his death, the mystery of the man of the forest remains unresolved.
There are no more crimes against children after Gilles Garnier's death.
As for his home, the Saint-Bono Hermitage, it was left to the forest for good. No one ever wanted to enter this cursed place again. Malines, a Burgundy village a few kilometers from Dijon. It is said that a curse was placed on the village in 1640, making it the property of the devil.
In the not-too-distant past, Malines' inhabitants numbered 666.
Malines is, after all, the devil's nickname.
Earthquakes, evil forces, fatal accidents. The village of Malines has been the scene of many tragedies over the centuries.
This hole in the underworld has led to the story of Malines, which some believe to be quite evil.
How can we explain these strange phenomena? Malines as the devil, with its 666 inhabitants, is it really a cursed village? More than ever, it seems to be connected to Satan.
Malines has been cursed.
Cursed by whom? By the devil?
Malines is the name of this charming village in Burgundy, which was founded around 6,000 years ago in the Neolithic period. For centuries, Malines has attracted numerous sorcerers to the Mont Rocheux overlooking the village. The area is renowned for its particularly powerful telluric forces, and it was on this hill that a castle was built in the 12th century. This rugged hill is reputed to contain mysterious forces within its soil.
The place where the castle is built is a geologically apparent place. The forces exerted by fractures and tears are colossal. You can see them when you look at this cliff. 12 to 15 meters high. We're dealing with something massive, powerful, and an expression, one might imagine, of monumental ancestral anger.
An anger which, from the Middle Ages onwards, has been associated with the evil one. For here, it is said that the forces that run through the hill have enabled the devil to make his way into the world of the living.
There's a place in Malines called the Devil's Hole. Surprisingly, it's located just below the castle.
It's a hole to the underworld, a hole to hell. And we're going to associate this cave with something negative, something evil.
We're in the late Middle Ages, and this gateway to hell terrorizes the villagers. The story goes that young girls have been kidnapped by a supernatural being who has taken them to his lair at the bottom of the cave. Screams have been heard by the villagers, and the Lord of Malines is taking the matter very seriously.
The Seigneur de Malines will, with the power of the church, the power of God, install a chapel, and they're going to make it as vertical as possible, as close as possible to the grotto. Symbolically, the religious authority and the authority of the Lord are above negative forces. This gives an idea of the importance of magic in medieval life. Positive forces, white magic, and negative forces, black magic.
It is said that the presence of the chapel just above this gateway to hell finally unleashed the elements. A supernatural force burst forth from the bowels of the earth and caused the floor of the holy place to crumble, sparing the rest of the castle. In Malines, people are convinced that Satan has returned in person, that he is the Antichrist who has come to confront God by casting a curse on mankind.
There are very bad seasons, very bad harvests, famine, and consequent epidemics. So we think that these storms, this hail, all that is divine justice that condemns. So the search began for the culprits.
In 1640, 9 witches and 3 sorcerers were arrested. They were suspected of having committed atrocities in the region in the name of Satan, of being responsible for this demonic rampage. and of having killed villagers by means of the blowing and gog spells.
With the blowing spell, all you had to do was look at the person, blow on them, and evil would befall them. The gog spell, it was animal droppings, it was blood, it was crushed bones, all kinds of ingredients were used to make the person perish.
The 12 defendants maintained their innocence, but the justice system in Malain gave them no chance. Here, as elsewhere in Europe, the Inquisition gave full powers to civil courts. In reality, arbitrary judgments concealed dark designs.
It was more a judgment based, as everywhere else, on denunciation, on jealousy, land ownership, greed, power, or perhaps simply because these people made a nuisance of themselves for being different from others.
In the early summer of 1640, accused admitted under torture to being true witches and working for Satan. One witch went so far as to make a confession that terrified the population. She claims to have placed a curse on the village of Malain, which will take effect on the day of her death. None of the 7 judges will listen to these threats, and it is ordered that justice be done for the 12 condemned witches.
Justice is demanded, and to decide who is innocent and who is guilty, they are tied by the thumbs, i.e. the thumbs of the hands and the thumbs of the feet are bound.
And you are thrown into the water.
We see what God decides for you. If you float, you're a demon. Because normally, all natural beings in this divine creation don't float like that. So we kill you, we prick you with pitchforks, we buy you. In short, you're bought. If you've sunk like a good Christian, you're innocent. And it's God who will recognize you, forgive you, and welcome you to paradise.
11 of the accused drowned within seconds. They were found innocent and had the right to be buried in the Malain cemetery, but there was one exception. This was the witch who had claimed to have cast a diabolical spell over the village. She wouldn't sink, so she was struck down with a pitchfork. She was burned and her ashes thrown into the pit of hell. The drowned women of Malain caused a stir. The torturing judges were summoned to Paris in 1640. Where they in turn met with an unfortunate fate.
The condemnation handed down to the witches was rejected. To accuse the torturers of expeditious justice, to say the least, they in turn were to be condemned. This is the first appeal in which a local court decision has been overturned by the state. It's a sign that we're moving further out of the medieval world.
The 7 judges were hanged in public in Dijon at the end of 1640. In Malain, people talked for a long time about the witch whose ashes were thrown into the devil's hole. Did she really put a curse on the village to avenge herself on her tormentors? In Malain, the story goes that this demonic spell plunged the village into hell.
This hole in the underworld has given rise to a story about Malain that is magical enough for some, and perhaps even evil enough for others.
Strangely enough, in Milan, there has been an impressive series of deaths. 28 suicides caused by demonic possession. The deaths were as disturbing as they were violent, and left a lasting impression on the people of Malain.
Malain has remained synonymous with evil in some minds. There were many fantasies of witches flying. Seeing sabbats and seeing the devil and seeing strange people everywhere.
The most surprising thing is that this curse seems to have survived the centuries. Possessions, strange deaths, spells. Could Malain really be under a curse? Here, many phenomena remain unexplained, all the more so when strange accidents will claim more victims in the near future.
Some things have happened in Malain. There's a railroad line not far away which passes through Malain and stops in Malain. A little earlier, a train derailed.
On September 5, 1888, at 2:20 a.m., a train from Paris entered the Vélard Viaduct near Malin. The locomotive inexplicably veered off course, plunging the train into the precipice. The disaster claimed 12 lives. On July 23, 1962, Express number 53, Paris-Marseille, derailed at the same point. The accident claimed 39 lives. In both cases, accident reports failed to explain the causes of the tragedies.
It's said that the track suddenly buckled. That's one of the strange things about it.
The families of the victims will ask for an investigation, but in both cases, the authorities will find no rational explanation.
It fell off the viaduct, but maybe it was an accident too, I don't know.
What happened in Malin? A curse? The devil's relentlessness? Or just a series of random accidents? To this day, no one has come up with a rational answer to explain these mysterious tragedies. But in Malin, everyone fears that the witch, wrongly accused in the 17th century, has not yet said her last word. All over France, the devil takes on the guise of cursed creatures to terrorize populations. In Périgord, it was a dragon that sowed terror. The shipbuilders who sailed on the Dordogne feared crossing its path and perishing with their craft. In the Allier region, strange apparitions were, at the Château de Vosges, following a curse. A ghost, or to be more precise, a white lady, is said to have appeared in the 16th century, but also barely 30 years ago. Was it also a ghost that haunted the church of Saint-Étienne-l'Allier in Normandy, giving rise to the legend of the Cursed Mass? Every evening at 11:00 p.m., a mysterious blue glow appeared inside the holy place, causing panic in the village. France's legends and strange creatures, of legends and strange creatures. In the heart of the Périgord region, a majestic river forms some of the most beautiful landscapes in France. Between the Dordogne and the people, a true love story.
We like to say that the Dordogne is the blood that runs through our veins.
At first glance, it's a calm, peaceful river, ideal for navigation. In the Middle Ages, thousands of boatmen used the river to transport a variety of goods.
It really was the main communication route between the Lot and the sea.
But as you approach the town of Lalande, the Dordogne changes abruptly. Navigators invoke the saints to get through this dreaded passage unscathed.
From this point onwards, the Dordogne becomes difficult and dangerous to navigate. It's an area where boats could run into trouble or even be shipwrecked.
The area was so dangerous they thought it was cursed.
Cursed is the word. So many shipwrecks and so many victims could only be the work of a supernatural creature.
In those days, people actually believed that a dragon lurked beneath the waters of the Dordogne.
The dragon lurking at the bottom of the Dordogne here in Lalande created a real climate of terror, so much so that the local population tried everything to fight him. The intervention of valiant knights, the help of the church, and even sacrifices.
The accidents continued. The dragon never left the river.
So, how did the legend of the Coulobre, the dragon who exterminated bateliers and terrorized the region for over 15 centuries, come about? How did the battle between the forces of good and this evil creature plunged into the murky waters of the Dordogne come to an end? A few kilometers from Sarlat, the Dordogne flows peacefully between cliffs and cultivated fields. It has always been a precious source of life for the region's inhabitants.
It fed us. It was used to wash clothes, fish, and transport goods.
The river has made a major contribution to the economic development of Périgord, from antiquity until the 19th century. Several dozen boats used this privileged route between the massive central and the Atlantic coast every day.
Boats went downhill, they came up, they came up, they came up. It was the Dordogne, the highway of communication.
Although transport generally takes place on calm waters, one area has always been particularly feared.
Here, we can see that there are two very different atmospheres on the Dordogne since it's quite calm here. There are no particular traps. The navigation is favorable, but on the other hand, when you arrive here, there's this succession of rapids that starts.
Just before the small town of La Linde, a powerful current suddenly appears, accompanied by swirling drops. A real nightmare for the boatmen who had to use this passage.
The boatman coming down from Argenta, arriving in the Lalande area, knew he was in for a tough time. Going down the Dordogne was not without risk.
Many shipwrecks occurred here near La Linde at the Gratus Rapids. Many Gabariers lost their lives there.
It's a cursed place for many boatmen.
To overcome the difficulties of the terrain and avoid compromising trade, architects designed ingenious vessels.
This is exactly the type of boat that used to sail down the Dordogne from the Lot to Bergerac or Libourne. These boats are known as Courpets de Haute Dordogne. In those days, the boat was loaded with wood. It was really flush with the water, so you couldn't make any false maneuvers because you risked taking on water.
Tension aboard these boats was at its highest, and despite the men's vigilance, shipwrecks were commonplace.
You can imagine a loud noise, a crash, the boat coming apart, the men screaming. Something short, violent, noisy, and sometimes with a bad ending.
In La Linde, the number of victims is increasing all the time. The place is so feared that a new profession has sprung up. Riverside smugglers, offering their services to help boatmen cross this cursed stretch of river.
The ferrymen were born out of the recurrent accidents that happened every year.
The Gabariers were really stuck and forced to pass through here, obliged to rely on the smugglers to survive. They were really bound hand and foot by this very difficult situation.
These men, who knew the Dordogne inside out, may well have saved a few lives. But it is said that some of them sometimes abused their powers.
The smugglers became very important, and some of them took advantage of the situation to get paid a lot of money, a lot of money, a lot of money. Some have even gone so far as to buy the boatmen.
But the smugglers weren't enough. The Dordogne continues to claim victims, so other explanations were sought. The upheavals in La Linde were not the only cause of the shipwrecks.
The explanation readily given at the time was that a cursed hand had intervened. In this series of disasters and shipwrecks.
For the ancients, it was a power, and this power had to be qualified. And why not describe it in terms of a dragon, an elf, or whatever?
The Dordogne was readily regarded as a monster that could devour humans in a matter of seconds.
Eventually, this cursed hand took shape. In the murky waters of the river, it was thought that a giant, diabolical creature could be seen.
These shipwrecks were attributed to a monster known as the coulobre, meaning snake in Occitan.
It's a generic term. Coulobre, coulouvre, serpent, dragon, griffin. Everyone has their own reading.
A mysterious dragon in the river. The population firmly believes in it.
Today we're more Cartesian-minded, but back then people really believed that beneath the waters of the Dordogne, the waters of the Dordogne looked a dragon just waiting for a signal. An energy, a moment to devour the Gabariers and their cargoes.
Each new shipwreck fueled fears. From village to village, the presence and existence of this river monster was beyond doubt. Rumors spread. The creature comes to life in the popular mind.
This coulobre was a kind of giant snake with wings too. A huge mouth that spat flames and ate Gabariers. This monster was so huge that in fact its tail was on the heights of La Linde. On the heights of La Linde, while its mouth was in the Dordogne.
In places where the river becomes dangerous, when the accident happens, it's the dragon that gets angry for some.
This dragon, nestled in a cave along the cliff opposite Lalande, came to drink or eat from the Dordogne when he needed to.
The Coulobre created a terrifying climate of terror in Lalande. Although he mainly attacked the boatmen, it is said that his wrath, men, women, and children. The dragon can strike at any time without distinction.
The feeling of fear soon became one of terror because you had to go to the Dordogne every day. You had to fetch water, you had to wash your clothes, you had to fish. You were in constant contact with it and therefore in constant contact with danger.
It was then that the people of Lalande decided to react. Some courageous men took up arms.
At that time, men fought the dragon and were never seen again.
Inhabited by an obscure creature, the Dordogne recalls its power to anyone who dares defy it. The population decides to change its strategy to fight the monster. They offer him their most precious possession.
People were so frightened of the Coulobre that they tried to find ways to calm it down, to tame it, to coax it. They came up with the idea of offering it virgins.
On the riverbank, innocent young girls are sacrificed as offerings to an invisible but merciless monster.
There was fear of the monster, fear of the dangerous Dordogne. And on top of all that, there was even more misfortune. And fear and abomination, because not only had the Dordogne taken the Gabariers, but young girls were being offered as sacrifices. This really added to the drama.
Dramatic, tragic, but once again, it was a failure. Faced with the desperation of the people of Lalande, the church decided to intervene.
At the time, the church said there's a serious problem going on. There's an emulation of diablerie coming out. We need to intervene.
In the Middle Ages, Christianity had a hard time establishing itself in the countryside. The distress of the population was the perfect opportunity to attract more followers.
The church's response was to send the Périgord saint to deal with the problem. Dealing with the problem was to fight the infamous beast, the Coulobre, which was the source of all the difficulties encountered.
It was the patron saint of the diocese of Périgueux and Sarlat-Saint-Front who attacked the diabolical creature. His staff and his religious faith are his only weapons, and they are effective. It is said that the Coulobre is driven out of the region.
When this little Abbé Saint-Front came and freed the country from this monster, it was truly a biaise. You can just imagine the joy and exultation of the people. There were processions, all in veneration of this little Abbé Saint-Front.
The feat attributed to Saint-Front made him a subject of adoration.
By intervening, they managed to bring the population back into the fold of the church.
In the 12th century, a chapel was built in the abbot's honor. It overlooks the cursed area where the dragon prowls. The dragon, like an eternal challenge between good and evil.
It was here that the saint overcame the Coulobre, and it is here that the saint will live to ensure that the Coulobre does not return to haunt the duchy. Come back to haunt the Dordogne, or haunt it gently. This spot evokes the saint's power. It dominates the Dordogne. This little chapel stands proudly on the rock, on the edge of the void, and is a reminder both of the power of the church over the beast, over the Coulobre, but also over the land.
This Romanesque chapel, visible from afar, acts as a sanctified lighthouse. It gives a signal to boatmen terrified by the beast.
For the boatmen who discovered it, it was a signal that it was time to pray to the saint or invoke him to try to cross this difficult spot favorably.
However, Saint-Front's exploits did not put an end to the curse. Shipwrecks continued until the 19th century.
The Coulobre was struck down by the saint, so it wasn't killed. It has been dominated. It remains under the control, as it were, of the holy bishop.
Even if the dragon had been subdued by St. Front, there's no guarantee that it won't wake up or come back.
Today, the colobur has not disappeared. In fact, you can see that in some places. You can see the breath coming out of its nostrils.
Did the dragon of Lalande really exist? Here, doubt still remains. The coulobre remains in people's minds as a reminder of the tragic times when Gabariers risked their lives here at the foot of the village. Château de Vos in Allier is one of the most beautiful castles in Auvergne, a truly imposing massive architectural gem.
When visitors arrive here, they're always left speechless. You arrive at something you'd never imagine.
There's a sense of mystery when you come face to face with this mass, this fortress.
What contributes to the castle's mystery is its imposing size, its architecture that brings together several eras. But not only that, the site has also been the scene of a surprising and disturbing ghost story.
It seems that the ghost appeared above the Chemin de Ronde.
Many people are convinced that Château de Vos is haunted by the specter of a young woman who fell victim to a terrible curse in the 16th century.
Poor thing, she died of hunger, cold, and fear.
But the strangest thing is that, contrary to many legends, witnesses above suspicion were able to witness this strange phenomenon.
All of a sudden, they saw something. It moved, it manifested itself, it flickered, but it wasn't very definite. It was kind of a blur.
Whether it was a real encounter or a collective hallucination, these disturbing and place Vos among France's most mysterious haunted sites. How did the site come to inherit this sad privilege? A look back at an incredible story, where love and jealousy are said to be the cause of a terrible curse. Some 30 kilometers from Clermont-Ferrand, an impressive chateau overlooks the village of Vos.
Its location is strategic, perched on a rocky outcrop between three regions, Bourbonnais, Auvergne and Berry. It was therefore not only a castle for defense, but also for surveillance of the entire region.
Its construction began in the 11th century, but it was in the Middle Ages that all its power was expressed through its architecture.
You can see the medieval part, i.e. the clock tower, the poorly capped tower, and the keep. Between the clock tower and the tower with the tower, there's a covered walkway that's a rarity.
This fortress was inhabited by respected local lords. Stories of castles like so many others. But in the middle of the 16th century, the arrival of a new owner was to mark the history of the place forever.
In 560, the chateau fell into the hands of Count Guy de Daillon, whose wife was Jacqueline de Lafayette.
He was an important Bourbonnais figure who was also seigneur of the Château du Lude in Anjou.
The Count and his wife lived the life of a chateau. Like all aristocrats of the time, they were surrounded by a court and served by servants. One morning in 1560, a certain Lucy introduced herself to them.
One day a young woman arrives, a servant.
She's very young, 18, and above all, very beautiful.
The Count liked her very much.
Guy de Daillon immediately fell under the spell of this well-mannered young woman. He hired her as his wife's lady-in-waiting.
She surrounded him, helped him, and passed the time, especially when the Lord went hunting or to war.
The Baroness and her lady-in-waiting soon become very close, inseparable.
A complicity, I'd almost say an intimacy, between a woman who's beginning to age and this young girl who perhaps also reminds her of her youth.
But this tender friendship doesn't last. Dark clouds soon gather. Jacqueline de Lafayette begins to distrust the beautiful Lucy, who has a tendency to turn the comedian's head. The Count's head.
Guy de Dion's relationship with Lucy is certainly one of friendship at first, gradually developing into intimacy, and then most certainly into an extramarital relationship.
Abandoned and bruised, the deceived wife can only watch helplessly as this painful love affair unfolds.
The Countess must certainly have had her doubts.
Yes, but what can she say about it except to endure? After all, we live in a patriarchal society where it's the man who dominates, who leads, who commands, and where women have little to say in his presence.
As the months go by, the Countess's resentment grows. She felt doubly wounded, deceived by her husband and betrayed by her lady-in-waiting.
As long as the Count was there, if you like, her reactions could only be measured. She couldn't give free rein to her jealousy.
But behind the mask of circumstance, Jacqueline de Lafayette broods over her revenge. She waited for the right moment to take action.
Jacqueline de Lafayette is about to act when her husband, Guy de Dion, leaves to fight for the king.
It's the ideal moment. She knows he'll be gone for many weeks, if not months.
When the Lord goes to war, it's his wife who gets all the power, the rights of life and death. So now she'll be able to exact her revenge.
And the revenge promises to be terrible, commensurate with the suffering and humiliation suffered by the Countess.
She decides to have our brave Lucy seized, and she locks her up in the clock tower. She chose here because this room represented something of the ultimate place to suffer.
Locked in this squalid room with no food, no water, nothing, Lucy can only curse her torturer. Cloistered and abandoned in this antechamber of death, Lucy has no way out. The only door left open is a cruel decoy.
Imprisoned in the tower, Lucy may have had access to the Chemin de Ronde, but either way, it was only a prison, an extension of her prison.
It's hard to imagine how long and painful the hours and days must have been for this prisoner, deprived of everything as if she were walled up alive.
Lucy, with the cold, hunger and lack of water, gradually lost her health and passed away. Die, much to Jacqueline de Lafayette's delight.
In the tower, Lucy's cries of despair fell silent forever. But on the evening of her death, the villagers witnessed a strange phenomenon.
In the middle of the night, the villagers see a light rise from the clock tower. And then evaporate into the night.
For the people of Vos, there can be no doubt. This mysterious glow could only be a ghost, a white lady.
Many chateaux have white ladies, simply because it was thought that those who died violent deaths would come back to haunt the living and return to haunt the dead. Haunt the living and return to the place where they were killed.
The ghostly apparition at the scene of the tragedy can therefore mean only one thing.
As Lucy died a violent death, she returns to haunt the place where she died.
Rumors and gossip spread quickly in the village. People are convinced that if Lucy has become mistress who cursed her and condemned her to never see the man she loved again. Since then, the unfortunate woman has been wandering the corridors of the castle, her soul in pain.
This news has indeed been passed from inhabitant to inhabitant, from village to village all around Chateau de Vos.
In the 16th century, the story of Lucy's ghost enthralled the region's storytellers. That's what they say in the village. At wakes, they tell this mysterious story from household to household. For centuries, Lucy's ghost seems to have been forgotten. No more sightings were reported. Until 1970, when a certain Tagouri de la Tour became the owner of Château de Vos.
Tagouri de la Tour was a cultured man who read widely and composed music.
Tagouri de la Tour suffers from insomnia, so he spends long, airy nights in the castle corridors. Then, one evening, he had a vision.
He said he saw a kind of light passing by, a kind of silhouette that quickly evaporated, but which he could still make out.
The phenomenon repeated itself several times. For Tagouri de la Tour, there could be no more doubts.
He deduced that there was a ghost, and that the ghost was Lucy.
Strangely, the White Lady only appeared in front of the new master of the house. Lies, trickery, madness. In any case, the man seems bewitched by this White Lady.
He's almost fallen in love with her, like Guy de Daillon 5 centuries ago.
It's an uncanny coincidence that Tagouri de la Tour is reminiscent of Guy de Daillon. In fact, like the tale, he's a distinguished ex-military man. But what the villagers take as ramblings is starting to seriously annoy him.
He was so convinced, in my opinion, of Lucy's existence that he wanted everyone to know. He wanted proof.
Convinced that the ghost was within his walls, he sent for several journalists, including a team from France Inter, in August 1984. In all, 8 journalists visited the chateau. While they were intrigued by the ghost story, some were skeptical. I was the most Cartesian of the group. Jean-Michel Coquille was part of the France Inter team as sound engineer. He remembers perfectly that evening in August 1984.
It's very strange, waiting to see a ghost in a medieval castle from the 11th century in the Chemin de Ronde. It's incredible. There's a silence. The atmosphere is very, very heavy. Very, very heavy. Everyone is on the lookout. We'd made sure we knew the route.
Gathered near the Chemin de Ronde, journalists waited impatiently to observe the phenomenon. And a few minutes after midnight, the unthinkable happened.
Something was happening. It's in the Salle des Pendus.
Jean-Michel wasn't in the same room as his comrades, but thanks to his helmet, he didn't miss a thing of this surreal scene. I could hear that something was going on, because I could hear them reacting. There are 8 of them going, "Oh!" So you can't do that. You have to see something. More importantly, I could hear flashes, so he was photographing something. At the same time, a strange, deafening noise was recorded. To this day, the noise remains totally unexplained. Likewise, the astonishment of those present that evening remains a mystery. Admittedly, they witnessed a completely unbelievable scene.
They saw a luminous form moving about, and they all saw it at the same time. The shape was nebulous, white. It moved slowly, apparently. It was very visible.
What the journalists saw, heard, and recorded remains one of France's greatest mysteries.
Something happened, that's for sure, and it's never been explained.
Nobody knows what really happened at Château de Vos that night in August 1984. As for Tagouri de la Tour, he continued to see this White Lady prowling the Chemin de Ronde until the day he died. Since then, there have been no more appearances at the chateau, but history has shown that Lucy can be very patient before reappearing. Now we're off to Normandy, a land of legend, witchcraft, and exorcism. Saint-Étienne-l'Allier has not escaped this reputation. Here, an elegant 12th century church. is said to have been the scene of a mysterious story with many twists and turns.
It was nighttime and the inhabitants saw a light. This light was moving. Inside the heart of the church?
It happened many, many times. It happened very, very often in the evening.
What was happening inside the church? The terror-stricken population was convinced that this mysterious glow could only be a diabolical manifestation.
Such phenomena were attributed to the devil.
Had the church been struck by a curse? To unravel the mystery, some went so far as to approach the strange glow. What they saw would make their blood run cold.
In fact, they could make out a moving figure.
Was the church haunted? What could be done to allay popular fears and solve the mystery surrounding the holy place? We're about to discover the most surprising of Norman legends, whose title alone is chilling.
The legend of the cursed Mass.
Some 30 kilometers from Honfleur, a bell tower dominates the Normandy plain. It's that of a church, whose construction began in the 12th century, in the heart of a village of 600 souls, Saint-Étienne-l'Allier. Inside, a unique piece makes it an exceptional church, a choir enclosure.
In the past, the ordinary faithful attended services in the nave, and the clergy and nobility in the choir.
But if the church is famous in the region, it's mainly because of mysterious events that took place there in the Middle Ages. It all began one evening at around 11:00 p.m.
Residents saw a light appearing in the church window.
The church was closed that evening, yet lit up from within.
A glimmer behind the glass. Perhaps someone had forgotten to extinguish the candles. The next day, before closing the church for the night, vigilance was exercised. But a few hours later...
The following evening, exactly the same thing happened, with a light appearing inside the church, making the stained glass windows glow. Even then, the coincidence was a little stranger.
What's even stranger is that this mysterious glow now appears every evening and always at the same time. At the same time, intensifying the villagers' fear.
It made quite an impression, and some people began to believe that it was the church itself that was coming to life. The light tended to flicker, sometimes swelling, and then at other times, on the contrary, calming down a little. It was like a breathing movement. Stained glass windows that lit up like that could also be reminiscent of glowing eyes in the dark. They were very scared. They said to themselves, but this is an unexplained phenomenon.
If this phenomenon is unexplained, there is nevertheless a fear that haunts all minds.
There may have been an idea that the church itself was under a curse.
It may have been thought that the church had been the victim of a curse, since no explanation could be found. People went to Mass a lot, prayed to God, but the devil also had a considerable influence.
The mystery of the church was at the center of every conversation. The villagers were looking for answers, but no one was there to reassure them.
The problem was that the priest occupying the church at the time had died just a few days before the phenomena began.
The villagers set out to find the solution on their own.
The villagers gathered in the village square and began talking amongst themselves.
They sought volunteers to enter the church at night and observe the phenomenon up close. But of course, there weren't many volunteers, because they were afraid. The devil is scary.
To unravel the mystery, two personalities were appointed by the villagers. The beadle, the church's handyman, and the cantor, who sings the hymns during Mass. We said,
You're closer to the church, you guys have to go. They didn't volunteer, we forced them.
The men had to stay in the church overnight. They begin by inspecting every nook and cranny of the holy place, just to make sure everything was in order.
No suspicious noises, no lights, no anything. They settled in, then simply fell asleep.
But the beadle is a restless sleeper. He has nightmares and wakes up just before 0 p.m. And what he sees doesn't reassure him.
He actually saw a flickering blue glow moving inside the heart of the church. So not only did it appear out of nowhere, but more importantly, it was moving.
It passed in front of the high altar several times, in fact, with several trips back and forth.
Totally terrified by what was unfolding before his eyes, the beadle tried to wake his companion, but to no avail. So he runs away. For the villagers, the experiment is a failure.
They sent 2 men into the church, but only one of them witnessed the phenomenon. He couldn't wake up the second. Still, it's not very credible.
So the 2 men are urged to spend a second night in the church. They settle in and, surprisingly, this time it's the cantor who wakes up, awakens to discover the blue glow floating in the church. Despite all his attempts to awaken his companion, the beadle remains asleep. Why were the beadle and cantor, in turn, plunged in turn into a deep sleep? Were they under the influence of the mysterious blue glow? For the inhabitants of Saint-Étienne-l'Allier, the facts are taken very seriously.
The villagers really believed in the glow. They thought it was a mysterious effect. Perhaps the devil had entered the church and was manifesting himself, the light that was terrorizing the population.
So what was this strange glow that the beadle and cantor claimed to have seen with their own eyes? A spirit, a hallucination orchestrated by Satan. The villagers imagine the most diabolical scenarios. It is against this sinister backdrop that the new parish priest arrives to take up his post.
He is told of the phenomena that had been seen. He is very surprised but remains calm and tries to reassure the population.
The parish priest also decides to spend a night locked inside the church. Perhaps he feels better equipped to understand what's going on, being a man of the cloth.
As night falls, the priest settles in, determined to unravel the mystery of this church.
He waits, but really concentrates, wide awake, to make sure he's not in that in-between state you sometimes get when you doze off. It's really lucid. 11th stroke of the clock, the light appears.
In front of him, the blue glow that stirs passions takes shape and heads for the high altar.
The priest shows great composure. He observes the scene with great calm.
As he takes a closer look at the blue light, he notices something else. A moving silhouette.
He sees a white form, a kind of alb. He distinguishes priestly vestments, a white cassock.
He deduced that this unexplained phenomenon must have something to do with the church itself and with a man of the cloth. He connected the unexplained event to the church, seeing someone in a cassock.
The next day, the parish priest set about investigating what he had seen. He looked for answers in the church records.
Eventually, he spotted a strange detail. The previous parish priest, who had passed away, had received money to say Mass. The priest had died before he could celebrate. Mass for which he had been paid.
From now on, there would be no doubt about it for the new priest. This glimmer of light was nothing more than a ghost, the ghost of his predecessor.
After all, ghosts are defined as souls or spirits who have been unable to find peace and who continue to haunt places because they are unfinished business, frustration, or anger. And so this famous priest was probably haunting the place because he was sorry he hadn't been able to perform the Mass he was supposed to. That's why they call it a cursed Mass.
He was cursed himself by his conscience that was bothering him.
The new priest feels he has a mission. He wants to rid his predecessor of his curse.
He believes that the ghost is not really a ghost at all, but rather a soul in sorrow who had returned to this church to accomplish the work he had failed to do, the work he'd been unable to complete when he was alive.
To save him, the only possible solution was to perform a strange ritual with the ghost.
Mass had to be said by 2 people, the living priest and the soul of the deceased priest.
It was the ghost who said Mass and the living one who gave the responsories. The living priest, in pronouncing this Mass, was as if he could heal the ghost priest, the ghostly priest, bringing him a remedy to appease his soul.
The new priest was not mistaken. He succeeded in freeing his predecessor's soul.
From that evening on, the form disappeared. There is no longer any phenomenon in the church of Saint-Étienne de l'Allier.
The parishioners were happy to regain their tranquility.
So, superstition or proven supernatural phenomenon? The mystery continues in Saint-Étienne-l'Allier, especially since recent renovation work have revealed an astonishing burial site.
In 1990, these charity benches were dismantled, and behind the benches the carpenter discovered this magnificent statue that had been completely walled in for centuries. It was covered in rubble, it was hidden, nobody had seen it before. It was a mystery when it was discovered. We don't know much about it. We know he's a clergyman, and from the shape of the recumbent statue, it would appear to have been carved in the 13th century.
Who was this mysterious priest? Why was he buried for over 6 centuries? Was he linked to the appearance of the blue glow that terrified the local population?
Perhaps this priest was the one who delivered the good priest who couldn't say all his masses.
That's one of the mysteries of the Church of Saint-Étienne.
This astonishing discovery raises questions. What if the legend of the cursed Mass wasn't a legend after all? France's heritage is full of natural and historical wonders. Yet, over the centuries, long unexplained events have been associated with curses. Supernatural phenomena, heinous crimes, unexplained deaths, evil creatures. When fate takes its toll, popular fear spreads, and the worst happens. Superstitions, submission to the forces of good and evil. The mysteries of history have given rise to many legends.